Hello, historians. Welcome to the Turning Points of History. This week we are looking at the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I hope you have heard of it. If you have not, you're about to find out why this is quite an important event. So, when we talk about turning points in history, what are we talking about specifically? Well, it can be a little bit tricky, but generally speaking, if you ask yourself, what is a turning point? You would say a turning point is a specific, significant moment when something begins to change. Now, if you have your brain warmed up, hopefully you can get this little puzzle just quickly. What do you think this might be? Well done. It is exactly correct. A fork in the road. Well done. And if you didn't get it, now you know. Okay, so a fork in the road where history could go one way, events could go one way, or they could go a completely different direction. Perhaps this could be two options. Should we go left or should we go right? Or should we continue on the path we're going, or should we take this brand new path? Okay, so turning points in history. These are somewhat tricky sometimes to spot, to identify, and to classify. All right, so a significant moment when something begins to change. Now, an example I would use, you might say that Rosa Parks' famous bus protest was a turning point for the civil rights movement. Generally speaking, you could start from there because everything after that was different. That's what we mean by a turning point. It changed things. Okay, so if you look back, it's sometimes easy to look at particular turning points. You may be familiar with, for example, William the Conqueror, 1066. That is a major, major, major turning point in world history, but especially in British history. That's relatively easy to look at that and go, oh yeah, that changed things right there. So sometimes it can be easy, but sometimes not so much. Instead of it being a war or an invasion or a protest, it could simply be government policy, a new law, a new technology, something that comes to influence the world. Okay, so it is sometimes relatively easy to pick a turning point, but more difficult to address is things like how big of a turning point was it? What's the biggest turning point of all time? Was this a big turning point, small turning point? Okay. Why did that turn take place at all? What was the cause of it? Okay. Was it inevitable? Was it always going to happen, or did certain things have to fall into place? Why was it so important? What was its long-term impact? Okay. So when you look at those sorts of questions, it becomes a little bit trickier. So I'm going to use a famous example of what I call a failed turning point, a missed opportunity of history. Now, I tell this story a lot, so as I say, sorry if you have heard this one. So this is the story of Archimedes and his toy. So stop me if you've heard this one before. Okay, so according to Leonardo da Vinci, the 4th century Greek scientist Archimedes invented one of the first steam-driven devices in 330 BC. It was a steam-powered cannon fueled by water heated over coals. Now, it was seen as a novelty, a curiosity. It was just a bit of fun, okay? But let's actually look at that moment. Okay, this was 330 BC, and the first modern steam engine was built in 1698, 2028 years later. Now, that steam engine in 1698 could be seen as a turning point because that is what brought in the modern age, the Industrial Revolution. So imagine if in 330 BC, instead of being just simply impressed and amused by that steam engine toy, They instead saw its potential and implemented it. You would have the modern age starting 2,000 years earlier, meaning we would definitely have jetpacks and flying cars by now. So, with that introduction out of the way, that brings us to a place called Sarajevo in Bosnia in 1914, the 28th of June 1914 to be precise. So, this was perhaps the greatest turning point in history, at least up to 1914. Maybe we've had larger events since then, arguably. Okay, so this day would see the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. He was heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and also what I think is lost in history is Franz Ferdinand's wife, Sophie, the Duchess of Owenburg, was also killed that day by a gentleman by the name of Gavrilo Princip, who was a Serbian nationalist, a terrorist, and a member of something called the Black Hand. Now, the reason I think it's important to note that Sophie, the Duchess, was also killed that day, assassinated that day, is her death actually helped to inspire the events as well, because she was seen to be innocent and a victim, whereas some people believe that Archduke Franz Ferdinand sort of was fair game. He was a legitimate target, might have had it coming, but had Sophie not been killed, the events might have gone slightly differently. So I think it is important to remember that Sophie, the Duchess of Owenburg, was also assassinated that day. So when we talk about this assassination, I am going to bring your attention to a sandwich. What on earth does the assassination of Franz Ferdinand have to do with a sandwich? Well, this sandwich may indeed change everything. So, in terms of our questions, turning points questions, how big of a turn was it? Why did it take place? Was it inevitable? And what was the long-term impact? Why was it so important? Okay, so if we were looking at our sandwich and we have those questions, how big of a turn was it? Well, it led to World War I, and I want to bring emphasis onto that phrase, World War I, or the First World War, whichever way you want to say it. It gets said so much that I think people miss the impact of that statement. There had never, ever, ever been a world war before. This was the first World War, World War I. Okay, so in terms of how big of a turn was it, it led to the first ever World War. That is huge, never happened before. That's a big turn. Definitely, 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 that's a big turn. Okay, why did it take place? Well, there's some main reasons that it took place. Perhaps you know what I'm hinting at there. Don't worry, we're going to go into a little bit more detail as to the meaning of that particular phrase. Was that turn inevitable? This is going to bring us to the role of the sandwich. Again, it is here for a reason. It did play a role, and it does look delicious, but we'll move on from there. I will explain the role of the sandwich in terms of that question. Was this turn inevitable? Now, what was the long-term impact of that turn? Why is it so important? Well, it could be argued that the long-term impact of World War I leads to World War II, which leads to the Cold War, which led to terrorism, which led to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, which led to a distracted world, which led to the global financial crisis, which led to Brexit, led to Trump, led to Marine Le Pen, Matteo Salvini in Italy, Nigel Farage, and on and on. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but you can see everything that's happened since World War I is influenced by World War I. In fact, there is a legitimate argument to make that World War I shaped the world as we see it today to a greater extent than World War II in terms of political boundaries, rulers of countries, what we think of as countries and nations, the world map, the geography you look at. Most of that came out of World War I. Whether you know it or not, the country of Poland, for example, had not existed on a map of Europe for over 100 years until after World War I. And there's numerous examples of lines drawn on a map that we take for granted today that didn't exist and wouldn't have existed if not for World War I. So long-term impact is definitely there. So it put this domino effect into place, this war, everything that's happened since. And it's all because of the assassination and this sandwich. So I know what you're thinking. What has this got to do with a sandwich? Allow me to explain. So I told you I would go into what that meant, the main causes. Now, this is what we call an acronym. So they stand for militarization or militarism, if you will, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So you put all of that together, MAIN, the main causes. So, for example, many countries in Europe had been building up their armed forces. Maybe you're aware of it or not, but the classic example of that was a race between Germany and Great Britain to see who could build the most battleships. This was the super weapon of the day. This would be the same as having a competition to see who can build the most stealth bombers, or to some extent, who can have the most number of nuclear weapons or something like that. So you've got this arms race going on. All of these countries are building up their armies. Now, I don't know about you, but if I saw a whole bunch of people building up their armies, I might start suspecting that a war was coming. Perhaps. People don't usually build up their armies to not use their armies, generally speaking. Now, when we get to A, alliances, the countries in Europe had taken sides. What this meant was they had pretty much split somewhat down the middle-ish, and Britain, France, and Russia were one main group, and Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy formed another group. Now, Italy would eventually join the side of the Allies, and Germany and Austria-Hungary would find themselves supported by the Ottoman Empire, or essentially modern-day Turkey, during the war itself. But this was the situation before the war broke out. So imperialism was another one. Now, this is, again, just another example. We've got rivalries between the nations of Europe. So Germany had decided they wanted to build an empire. Now, Germany didn't exist as a country until 1871. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that. So they were new to the empire game, if you will. They were a bit late to the game. So they were in a race, and they wanted to have all these colonies, just like Britain had, just like France had. They wanted to look like they were a legitimate world power as well. Now, there was still countries such as Britain, such as France, that wanted to expand their empire or consolidate their empire as well, or even just to block the ambitions of other countries or other want-to-be empires to expand as well. Now, the N stands for nationalism. Now, nationalism can be defined as all sorts of different ideas, but generally speaking, nationalism was like this severe pride in your nation, the desire to be part of this nation state. Even Italy itself hadn't really existed as a nation, the nation of Italy as we imagine it today, until the 1800s. So you've got Germany and Italy that get formed as nations in the 1800s. Before that, there were a series of just independent cities, independent states that didn't necessarily have that idea that they were Italian. Most people would have said, oh, I'm from Milan, or I'm Roman, or I'm Sicilian, as opposed to I'm Italian, or I'm Prussian, I'm Bohemian. If you were from Germany, for example, you wouldn't say I'm a German. You would say I'm a Bohemian that speaks German, okay? Or I'm an Austrian that speaks German, whatever it may be, okay? So the idea of nationalism was these people were starting to identify into these groups, okay? Now, the example we're looking at here is the nationalism in Serbia. They became incredibly, incredibly prideful of their nation, and they thought it should absolutely come to be a stronger and united nation and independent from this country of Austria-Hungary. But what about the sandwich? Don't worry, I'm getting to it. So, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This is what's going on. All right, so it's June 1914, and this guy, the heir to the Austrian throne, so this is one of the more powerful empires in Europe, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he is the heir to the throne. So the next in line, he's going to be in charge of this giant empire next, okay? And he decides to visit Sarajevo to inspect the army. Now, Sarajevo is the capital of Bosnia in the very southeast corner of the Austrian Empire. Now, what is somewhat relevant to keep in mind is Bosnia had only recently been added to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there were some people there that were still a little bit upset about it and thought they shouldn't have been in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this was also one of the reasons that Franz Ferdinand wanted to visit, sort of consolidate their power there. So there were people there that thought it shouldn't be part of Austria, and he's there trying to say, no, you are, and I'll show you why you are. Okay, so it's a pretty small state. Some of it, not all of it, but some of it had been part of Serbia until Austria had taken it for themselves. And there were Serbian people that lived in Bosnia that were very angry about this. Okay, so before he went down there, Franz Ferdinand was told, you know, there's some people that are pretty mad, and you going down there might make them madder. There could be some trouble. You could be provoking things here. But he said, no, 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 I'll do what I want. You know, thanks for your warning. I appreciate your concern, but I know what I'm doing. One of the reasons for this, as mentioned earlier, is Franz Ferdinand was trying to show that, no, no, we're in charge. We're not scared, okay? If we cancel a tour because people say, oh, we might turn up and cause some trouble, we look weak, and then we will lose control of Bosnia. So this is the point of him visiting there. It is there. He's there to demonstrate the power of the empire. He's there to show Bosnia, even though you're new to our empire, you're part of it. You'll always be part of it. We are in charge of you. The sandwich is coming, I promise. So here's what goes down. He arrives on the 28th of June, 1914, and it was a Sunday. He's met at the railway station by a guy named General Potirik, and he is going to be taken to the city hall for reception and speeches. Speeches like, it's so great to be here in this glorious part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Subtext, haha, we rule you in your face. Okay, so there are 7 members of this group called the Black Hand that lined the route due to be taken by the Archduke's cavalcade. Now, the Black Hand are a group, a nationalist group. They are Serbian. They want Serbia to have more power and control in Bosnia. They want Serbia to expand its borders, and they definitely don't want Austro-Hungarian influence in that nation. So this group, the Black Hand, used to cause violence. They would attack particular leaders. They would kill members of police or military presence that were seen to represent the Austro-Hungarian Empire's control of Bosnia. So they were pretty dangerous. And 7 of these guys on this gang, the Black Hand terrorist group, they are on this parade route, okay? And one of these guys, a guy by the name of Nedjeljko Kabrinovic, I don't speak Serbian or Bosnian or Hungarian or anything that isn't English, really. Anyway, this guy threw a grenade at the Archduke's car. So the Archduke is on his way, and this guy sees his car coming, and he throws a grenade. Now, the driver sees this coming. He turns, he tries to avoid it, and he quickly speeds away from the scene. The grenade bounced off the back of the car, rolled underneath the next car in the cavalcade, and explodes. And 2 of the people in that car were badly wounded. Okay, so we've got this attempt on Franz Ferdinand's life by throwing a grenade at his car. It does not work. So Kabrinovic swallowed a cyanide capsule as instructed to avoid capture, and he jumps into the river. He did not die, however, mainly because he was not aware that that river was only about 3 feet deep. And when he took his cyanide capsule, he sort of half bit it, so he only got a half dose. So he did not die from the cyanide. He did not die from the river. He was captured. Now, Ferdinand, going through with his I don't want to look weak plan, he goes to the reception anyway, even though instead of canceling the event and saying it's too dangerous, there's obviously assassins in the city, he goes to the event anyway. And in his speech, he starts complaining about his treatment in the city. Now, after this particular speech, the Archduke says, you know what, I think I should go to the hospital and visit those people that were wounded. The general in charge of his safety on the day said, well, what we should do is we should have an alternate route. We don't want to go through the city center. It's too open, it's too dangerous, anything could happen. but the driver of Franz Ferdinand wasn't told of this particular change. They didn't have text messages or whatever back in the day, so it couldn't get the message out to everyone at the same time. So he just went, well, I'll just go the same way we came, and he takes the original route. And so he turns into Franz Joseph Street, and the general, Poturik, who was a passenger in his car, noticed that the altered route had not been taken. He starts arguing with the driver, who slowed the car down and decided to reverse. Now remember, this is 1914. Stopping a car and reversing it is tricky in 2020. In 1914, even more so. Now, in this particular moment, in this street, Franz Joseph Street, there happened to be this guy, Gavrilo Princip, who was buying a sandwich at a cafe, and hence the sandwich is connected. So he had thought, well, we tried to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, we missed our chance. I'm hungry, I'm gonna get something to eat. As he's there buying his sandwich, he cannot believe his luck. There is this car trying to back its way out of this street, so it's moving quite slowly. Everyone's sort of looking back behind. They're trying to navigate, they're trying to maneuver. No one's paying attention. He gets to walk right up to the car. He pulls out a revolver, pulls out a gun, and he takes aim at just 5 feet away. He hits the Archduke in the neck and his wife in the abdomen. So he fires a few shots at them, and they are mortally wounded. So, had it not been for the Archduke deciding to go visit to the hospital, had it not been for the driver not getting the message, had it not been for the general demanding they stop and turn around, had it not been for the fact that Gavrilo Princip was buying a sandwich, this could have turned out very, very differently. So, what happened next? Well, Serbia gets blamed by Austria for the murder. Serbia was very close to Bosnia, and there was evidence they had encouraged and supported groups like the Black Hand and given them weapons. Serbia was trying to use this insurrection to get Austria out of Bosnia for themselves. So Serbia gets blamed by Austria. Austria goes, Franz Ferdinand's been killed. This guy, Gavrilo Princip, did it. He loves Serbia, so he's obviously working for you guys. It's your fault. So they said, you must face punishment. We are going to invade. So Serbia says, well, you know what? I've got a friend of mine called Russia, who is kind of a big, powerful country. They're going to give me a hand. Because Serbia would have been relatively easy for Austria to crush. Relatively. Serbia still had a strong military, but odds are Austria-Hungary would have taken care of business. But Russia is a bit of a different issue. Russia's army was so giant, it was known as the steamroller, with the idea that it could just steamroll over anyone because of its sheer size. So Austria is a little bit worried. They do not want to get into a war with Russia. They don't want to lose a war against Russia because they would lose territory. So they call on their friend Germany for help. German government agrees to help, and of course that response upsets France. So France is saying, we'll put a stop to all this by getting involved, but they did not know that Germany actually had a plan to defeat France in 6 weeks before fighting Russia. So Germany is not exactly scared of France at this point. So they were going to go and attack France via Belgium. But as is often the case, this has a consequence of its own, because Britain had given Belgium a guarantee in 1839 that if anyone attacked her, Britain would attack the attacker. And this is how we end up with a situation where Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian in Bosnia, shoots an Austrian, and Britain declares war on Germany. It doesn't make sense at first, but when you actually look at it, you can see the dominoes falling into place. This assassination sets off a chain of events that leads to this war. Okay, so if we look at the little summary here, we've got the causes. Sarajevo in Bosnia, Austria-Hungary had taken over it in 1908. Serbia was not happy that Bosnia had been taken over by Austria-Hungary in 1908. And there were many what were known as ethnic Slavs, so many people who would be considered to be connected to Serbia lived there, and they hoped that they would be a part of Greater Serbia. This is what we talk about with this nationalism. We want to be part of the nation of Serbia. So in order to become a Greater Serbia and get rid of Austro-Hungarian control, assassination, violence, and murder are considered to be an option. Now, there had been a previous war in this particular area known as the Balkan Wars, and Serbia had been very successful. They had expanded their borders beyond Macedonia and Kosovo from the Ottoman Empire and become a much more powerful country. So this was another reason that nationalists saw this as a great sign that Serbia is meant to expand. So 28th of June 1914, remember, 28th of June 1914, remember, 28th of June 1914, remember, okay, you get it. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated with his wife Sophie, the Duchess, by Gavrilo Princip, okay? He had been there to inspect the army, and they had arrived at 9:28 a.m., and he would be dead by the afternoon. Okay, the assassins were part of this group called the Black Hand, supported by nationalistic Serbian military officers, which is why the country of Serbia gets blamed for the actions of this one group. So this group had been supplied by Serbian intelligence with bombs and pistols and had been somewhat trained by them. So this was on the 28th of June. Now, if you remember, 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. So 30 days in June. So it's the end of June. So what begins is this international crisis, which was known as the July crisis. So we can see the dominoes falling into place. So Austria blames Serbia for Ferdinand's death and declares war on Serbia. Germany has said they're going to help Austria-Hungary. Russia has said they're going to help Serbia. So Germany has to declare war on Russia, and France therefore has to defend Russia, and Germany therefore declares war on France because they're allied with Russia, and Germany's more worried about France than Russia, so they have to get to France as quickly as possible, quickest way into France through Belgium, which of course brings Britain into the war. So we can see these dominoes all falling into place. So the assassination of Franz Ferdinand is a rather large turning point, a rather large event. It leads to the First World War. It hadn't happened before. This is the First World War. This is huge, okay? So, for the question, did a sandwich start a war? Well, was the turn inevitable? The sandwich. Had Gavrilo Princip not wanted a sandwich from that cafe, he might not have been there. This might not have happened. This is a key point to remember. All of these small details have to fall into place. I personally, there are people who disagree, but I personally do not think that any historical event is inevitable. It can go any way. It depends on our actions, okay? I like the saying, fate is what happens when decisions get made. You could imagine Gavrilo Princip doesn't decide to eat a sandwich, this doesn't happen. Or Austria decides not to blame Serbia, this doesn't happen. Or Russia decides not to support Serbia, etc., etc., etc. So, this is where I want to finish with this idea, the main causes of World War I. Whether you've seen this before, this is an often frequent way you will be taught about the main cause of World War I. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, militarism. Oh, our army is our empire. If our army's strong, our empire is strong, or if our army's strong, our nation's strong. As long as we have a strong army, everything's fine. Now, good thing no one thinks like that these days. Donald Trump. But anyway, that is what we call militarism. I want to go fight for my country. I want to fight in my army, because if I fight in my army, I'm helping our country expand. This whole idea. Now, there's another issue going on with militarism, which connects with imperialism, which I will get to in a moment. But the second thing that's going on here was the alliances, the countries agreeing to support one another. Instead of just country versus country, this is group of countries versus group of countries, which of course brings in everyone. hence a world war. Now, in terms of the imperialism, this is the country's or the empire's desire to expand, which brings us back to the connection to militarism. Now, war was thought to be fantastic in 1914. War was awesome. God, how much do we love war? And the reason for that is, for example, Germany became a nation in 1871 because of a war they had with France. There was a war between Prussia and France, and this leads to the unification of Germany. So war had literally given Germany their nation. France has an empire. They had built that empire by conquering nations, conquering land all around the world. So war had been fantastic for France. Britain has the biggest empire in the world, and they had done that through the strength of their navy, their domination of the waves, and their uh, seemingly invincible influence to be able to get anywhere on the planet. War was fantastic. And then, of course, you've got nationalism. That links to that idea. My nation expands through imperialism, and this happens through the strength of my army, militarism. Okay? France was very, very, very mad they'd lost that war in 1871, and they wanted revenge on Germany. Germany has the strongest army in Europe, without question, and it gave them a sense of national pride. Now, Russia had seen a series of setbacks. They'd lost a war, for example, against Japan in 1905. They were looking to strengthen their nation and get that national pride back through war as well. And of course, we've discussed the nationalism in Serbia. So you will see this taught many different ways: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, main causes. Okay. We've got all of these connections between these things. Now, this is the way it often gets taught, and that is a good way of approaching the issue and remembering these things, but it's a little bit simplistic, because we need to understand that this is the way that this event was reported. Heir to Austrian throne and wife are shot dead by schoolboy in capital of Bosnia. So it was headline news, but that does not say war is inevitable. That does not say, well, clearly we are going to see the borders of Europe reset. No, nothing like that. So the assassination was reported as a big event unto itself, okay? But it was not seen to be, at the time it happened, the day that it happened, that it would inevitably lead to war. Okay, so again, this leans into my idea. Again, I'm not saying it's the 100% truth, but I do not believe history to be inevitable. It is when certain people, certain groups, certain things influence decisions. Okay, I do find it interesting that in this headline they mention the Archduke wards off bomb later attacked by bullets is fatal. So they mention the fact that he'd survived an assassination attempt earlier in the day. So his decision to not just go home because clearly there's assassins about could be said to be a turning point unto itself. That would be the Austrian equivalent of Gavrila Princip deciding to get a sandwich. Okay, so the assassination of the Archduke. This leads to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. So Russia begins to mobilize. Germany declares war on Russia. The expansion of this war to include all of the countries of Europe involved in these mutual defense alliances. So when it comes to the causes of World War I, it looks a little bit more like this. You've got the arms race going on, you've got nationalist movements going on, you've got the events in Sarajevo, you've got something called Pan-Slavism, you've got the fate of Bosnia. Should it be Serbian? Should it be independent? Should it be in the Austro-Hungarian Empire? You've got the Balkan wars that have taken place. There's been two of them. You've had the Moroccan crisis. You've got colonial, all of these particular things piling and piling onto each other. Okay, so it is not a simple matter of, oh, well, it was this. Oh, it was because of this. Everything is connected. Okay, I quite like this particular cartoon, The Crime of the Ages. Who did it? Who is to blame for the start of World War I? Okay, so the final thing that I will leave you with today is this. I would propose that a better way to remember, or a more accurate way to remember the causes of World War I, is through this one: mania. Instead of the main causes, think of it as mania, because you've still got the militarism, you've still got the alliances, you've still got the nationalism, you've got the imperialism, but all of those things have been taking place for years, and there was no World War One. So we need to understand, why did this World War One start now? Militarism had been happening for a long time. Alliances had been in place for hundreds of years. Nationalism had been, since Germany in 1871. We saw the unification of Italy in the 1800s. Nationalism has been going around for a long time. Imperialism, Britain's had an empire for hundreds of years at this point. So why all of these things that have been around for such a long time, why do we say they caused World War One? Well, they do, or they contribute to it, but they cannot cause World War One without the assassination, okay? Hence, mania. Militarism, M. Alliances, A. Nationalism, N. Imperialism, I. So we've got all those four things, but the thing that threw it all up into a recipe for disaster was this second A, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Duchess Sophie at Sarajevo in Bosnia on the 28th of June, 1914. So when it comes to the causes of World War One, you must understand that that assassination is one of the key ideas. So do not ever forget the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and, of course, Duchess Sophie at Sarajevo in Bosnia on the 28th of June, 1914. That was the trigger, the spark, the cause of World War One. So I hope you have enjoyed this deep dive into history's turning points. This was certainly a major one. I hope it connects some dots for you. I hope that it demonstrates the importance of this event, and I hope that you have learned something, because there is going to be a quiz. Yeah, that's right. And I will look forward to seeing how well you do on that. Thank you so much, and enjoy your day.